Dzisiaj przygotowałem fragment wywiadu Brada Garlinghousa dla Bloomberga. Posłuchajcie, co ma do powiedzenia na temat bieżącej sprawy z SEC oraz potencjalnych ETF-ów na XRP.
It's worth kind of going back to your case with the SEC first, because you are far along, and as we sit here today on February 20th, how would you describe how the dispute has changed?
Well, look, I think for whatever reason, the SEC decided to make Ripple their first major case around this. And look, the reality prior to the case, we had been advocating for more clarity around the rules and regulations. And the good news has been other countries around the world have leaned into that and codified what should the rules and regulations, what's unique about crypto that needs to be changed. The SEC, frankly, has just hired more litigation that, what we call regulation through enforcement. And it really just started suing lots of people. And what's unfortunate is they have lost consistently. They lost the Ripple case on everything they cared about. I mean, even the soundbite you just had up, your Chair Gensler is saying that a lot of these are securities. What the courts have said in the cases they have brought, and certainly the case with Ripple and the token XRP, the court determined that XRP is not in and of itself a security.
When do you think that this will finally no longer be an overhang for you guys? You're one of many companies that are fighting the SEC at this point in time, but when can you call this an all clear? And do you think that this will make it so far as to reach higher courts?
Well, hard to predict whether it's going to reach higher courts. On everything we cared about, we won against the SEC. Will the SEC appeal and move it up the courts? We'll see. They sought approval to do what's called an interlocutory appeal. The courts denied that also. The case against me personally and Chris Larson personally was dismissed entirely with prejudice. So, look, from my point of view, the SEC has lost consistently. They lost the Grayscale case. I think if you're following the Coinbase case, the tone from the judge is, I think, pretty skeptical about some of the SEC's arguments. It stops, I think, when the SEC either realizes they're losing consistently, or you have Congress lean in and write new legislation. That's probably going to be hard in an election year. Maybe we'll see legislation around stablecoins this year, but I'm hopeful and we'll continue to advocate in Washington.
Well, you mentioned the Grayscale case, Brad, and it's Kaylee in Washington. Obviously, that was pretty instrumental in ultimately the SEC granting approval to not just Grayscale's conversion to a spot ETF, GBTC, that is, but spot Bitcoin ETFs more broadly. I'm sure you've seen there's buzz out there about potentially an XRP ETF being in the future. What do you make of that speculation?
Well, Kaylee, good to see you. I think it only makes sense there will be other ETFs. It's a little bit like, the earliest days of the stock market. You don't really want exposure to one stock or one company. You want to typically think about diversifying risk and what have you. And so I think we will see other ETFs. When we will see them is hard to predict. The sad reality of what we saw with the Bitcoin ETF is it was only because the courts forced the SEC's hand, and really Chair Gensler's hand, that we saw that finally come to fruition. And look, in my opinion, it makes these markets safer. It makes them more robust. And so this is good for the investment community to kind of lean into that.
So you would welcome an XRP ETF then?
We would certainly welcome it, and I think it's inevitable that there'll be, multiple ETFs around different tokens. And I think you'll even see ETFs potentially around baskets that also, I think, further diversify that risk.
Given there's so much excitement around the ETF dynamic here, are you in talks with the largest issuers, particularly BlackRock, to get this done?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. I know BlackRock has said some things publicly. We think it makes sense for the XRP community overall. Ripple obviously is a very important stakeholder in the XRP ecosystem, but we're not the only player. And look, we've seen, before the SEC lawsuit, XRP was the second most valuable digital asset. I think because of the headwinds of that lawsuit, we've now seen that largely abate. But the long-term view on these things is about, how do you create utility and really solve real world problems with these different digital assets? Bitcoin's doing that very well as a store of value. XRP and its dynamics around being very fast, very efficient, and low cost on a per transaction basis makes it ideal for payments. And that's where Ripple really has leaned into as a company.